dissent was requesting some time outside. They just wanted 10 minutes to go out on the terrace on the 8th floor and just breathe some fresh air. The third note sought clarification on counts 11 and 12. Those were bribery counts, and I want to read them to you. It's bribery actions to benefit Fred Davies and Qatar. So basically, it was alleged, and now he's been found guilty, that Davies gave Menendez, his then girlfriend, now wife, gold bars, cash, in exchange for Menendez's political power. They say that Menendez intervened in a criminal prosecution against Davies, and that he also introduced Davies to a member of the royal family in Qatar, and that person then invested in Davies' real estate project. So again, jury deliberations about 12, 13 hours before they reached that verdict. It was read a short time ago. Still waiting to find out what the verdict was for the other two defendants, but Senator Robert Menendez guilty on all counts. Jessica?
Compare, in your opinion, Alice, to the trials that you and I have covered with the former president, Donald Trump? I mean, not the same level of political notoriety, but this is a senator who's had that seat since 2006. I can imagine there's some kind of there's a lot of people down there, a lot of interest in this case.
Yes, compared to the former president on trial, not as crowded. The courtroom, not as crowded. I was able to go in and out and get a seat. I didn't have to go to an overflow room. I want to talk about the jury makeup for a moment, if I can. 6 men, 6 women, ranging in age from 27 to 68 years old. Very diverse. You know, his demeanor, Senator Menendez, has been, I wouldn't say upbeat, but he's maintained a positive outlook anytime he comes and goes and speaks to reporters who shout questions to him in the morning. He says, you know, he has faith in God, he has faith in the jury. You know, yesterday he said that the jury notes their questions seem to indicate this wasn't as simple a case as prosecutors were making it seem to them. You know, from my standpoint, we were not in the jury room. We don't know necessarily what these notes totally mean. To me, it seemed like they were just struggling with, you know, the judge's instructions to them on how exactly to reach the verdict on the specific counts. It doesn't necessarily mean they weren't sure how they felt about it. They were just asking very specific questions, clarifications on if this meant this, should they do this?
No, that makes a lot of sense. You mentioned 6 men and 6 women. I know during the trial it's hard to get information about the jurors. Hopefully we'll get that as they leave the courthouse. But have you heard anything about the makeup other than just the gender?
So we have Latinos, Latinas on this jury. We have Black Americans, we have white Americans on this jury. Again, it is a very diverse jury. It's a jury that has been paying attention. That is one thing that attorneys have noted. They have been engaged. They have been taking notes. And again, they deliberated for roughly a dozen or so hours. Yeah, definitely thorough. All right, Alice Gaynor, thank you so much. Let's get some legal analysis on the case now. Joining us is Hofstra Law Professor James Sample. Professor Sample, thank you for the time this afternoon. Prosecutors presented emails, documents, phone records. In your opinion, as you followed this trial, was there a smoking gun in this case, or was it sort of the cumulative effect of all the evidence?
Jessica, it's good to be with you. And I think that the answer is that it was definitely the latter. There were over 1,000 evidentiary exhibits presented over the course of the 2-month trial here. And as Alice's report just indicated, the jurors really deserve an extraordinary amount of credit. When you think about giving up, in essence, 9 weeks during the summer, no less, of your life and your autonomy to listen and to not be able to speak with each other about the case, the one thing that you have in common, until you get to deliberate. They did an extraordinarily thorough job. This was a complex case because it involved multi-pronged conspiracies. It's true. And one of the things that the defense tried to make a significant factor, particularly in its closing arguments, is that there's not one smoking gun. But the prosecution countered that with a very, very compelling story that just because there's not one so-called smoking gun, the cumulative effect of all of that evidence, all of the interactions, and the very, very compelling, I mean, if you're going to do bribery, you might as well go big, right? Go gold bars, go Mercedes-Benz, go $480,000 in cash sewn into your pant pockets and hidden in your closets. The defense tried to point the finger at Nadine Menendez. But remember, we're talking about the third-ranking official, at least at the time that the charges were initially brought, on the Democratic Party side in the United States Senate. So arguing that he's a somewhat clueless dupe who had been, you know, fooled by his girlfriend and now wife was not a particularly compelling argument, although it seemed to be all the defense really had.
Right. No, I think that's a fair assessment. The former senator decided not to take the stand in his own defense, which is a defendant's right, but sometimes it can affect the outcome. Do you think it affected the case?
Well, it's hard to know whether it affected the case. I think that certainly had Senator Menendez taken the stand, he would have opened himself up to a host of other charges, perjury being foremost among them. I mean, we saw this New York, the Southern District of New York, and earlier this summer in the state courts of New York, not far across the way there downtown in Manhattan. We saw with former President Trump. The risks for most defendants, particularly in white-collar cases where the facts are complex and where the questions can come at you blindly, far outweigh the rewards for most defendants in these kinds of cases. I think they made a sound decision. It's easy to Monday morning quarterback, but from a lawyering standpoint, putting Bob Menendez on the stand would have been extraordinarily risky. I think one of the things that is especially compelling about this case, and I think it offers a kind of teachable moment. In 2017, Senator Menendez faced another corruption trial. That case ended in a hung jury. Hung jury meaning not an acquittal, but effectively, because it was never retried, effectively he got away with it, so to speak. There were jurors in that case who would have voted for a conviction. It was 10-2. Instead of being chastened by that experience, that's a 2017 case. It's 2018, just mere months later, when the fact pattern at issue in this case starts to develop. That is an astounding indication that rather than being chastened, the lack of consequences for earlier actions other than the consequence of having to endure a trial, certainly, he decided to double down.
Right. It almost seemed like he was a bit emboldened, if I'm hearing you right. So Nadine Menendez is being tried separately. As you said, Menendez's defense really tried to pin a lot of this on her. Just a few hours ago, her trial was postponed indefinitely. That was obviously before this verdict came down. What do you make of that?
The timing was certainly an eyebrow raiser. I mean, I don't know, other than the fact that she's being treated for cancer. Right. We don't know a whole lot about the precise details, nor should we really know the precise details of her treatments and diagnoses. It was odd timing that order would come down while the jury was deliberating in Senator Menendez's case. However, I think that the safe assumption, it's not as though it's been dismissed, it's been postponed indefinitely. I think the safe assumption here is that the judge is taking some time, offering her some time to deal with the pressing matter of her cancer treatment, and we'll be on a kind of wait and see there. It is odd that postponement occurred while the jury was deliberating, but I don't think we want to read too much into it at this point. Yeah,
interesting timing. All right, Professor James Sample, thank you so much for your expertise. I know it's a busy afternoon. Really appreciate having you with us. All right, we're going to go back out now to CBS News New York reporter Alice Gaynor. She's joined by Christine Sloan, our colleague who has been inside the courtroom for the duration of the trial. Alice and Christine, I'm sure you have a lot of questions for each other out there.
So, Christine, you were in there when the verdict was read. First of all, let's talk about the energy in that room and what was the demeanor of Senator Menendez and also his two co-defendants.
So I've got to tell you, just right before the verdict was read, there was just complete silence for just minutes. And then when the verdict came in, it was off the bat, guilty, guilty, guilty. The senator found guilty, 16 counts, guilty. His reaction at first was just very stoic. He sat there, he nodded his head, and then he raised his hands to his face. He put his head down, and then he looked at the jury. He said nothing, and the judge had warned everyone, no outbursts whatsoever during the verdict reading. His sister Caridad and his daughter Alicia were also in the courtroom. They were silent, no tears, stoic. That look of dread said absolutely nothing. Wael Hanna, one of the defendants, who was also found guilty on 6 counts, his family sat in the front. They cried very silently. But it was a very extraordinary moment. I have covered the senator for more than 30 years. And he sat there quietly, and when he walked out of the courtroom, I was the first person walking out of the courtroom, and I walked out with him. He nodded his head and he looked very, very upset.
And we do want to point out that's the door where the senator would be coming out of. We have a camera position there, so if he does give any reaction. I know he's answered your questions before as he's come and gone from the courthouse here.
Yes, he has stopped and talked to me regularly. He always comes to our camera. He says a few words. And, the last words to me were that, I trust the jury. I put it in God's hands and in the jury's hands. And the jury, they ordered lunch very early today, so we knew something was up. They ordered their lunch. I think it was literally 30 minutes. And at 12:32, there was a verdict. The judge called the jury in, 6 men, 6 women, very diverse group of men and women. The jury foreperson, she is an investment banker. She is, from what I believe, Latina. And she read it. She read the verdict. It was guilty, guilty, guilty. They had asked questions during the deliberations that led some people to believe that perhaps they were leaning toward a not guilty verdict. But when the guilty verdict started coming in, I think everybody knew, because if the senator was found guilty on count 1, count 2, then he had to be found guilty on the rest of them as well. So these are bribery, conspiracy, extortion, acting as a foreign agent. That's the one thing that I know, having spoken to him, that he's very, very upset about. But actually, the conspiracy and the bribery charges carry more years. So they're going to be back here for sentencing on October 29th. And
what do we know about an appeal? Are they planning to file an appeal?
Yes. So during the trial and during after the summations, and when the jury was asking questions, number of the defense has said they will appeal, and they have until the middle of August to file certain motions. But they made a record of many different things, and the way that the jury at one point had asked about Fred Davies, whether the senator was interfering with his prosecution. And there was a slight question about the wording, and the defense was adamant. It took 1 hour to respond to that question. So they made a record of that. So they are going to appeal this.
Now let's talk about Senator Menendez stepped down as chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. He did not step down as senator despite repeated calls to do so, and now some of those calls once again coming in. What do you expect to happen now that he has been found guilty on all counts? Do you see him stepping aside and resigning?
I don't see that happening right now. I think we're going to have to wait a couple of days to see what happens. He did stay in this race running as an independent. From what I understand, he has spent about $2 million of the campaign chest, the war chest that he's got. So it's uncertain what he's going to do. Well, unfortunately, he's going to have to step down at some point. But if they appeal, I'm not sure where that process will go.
It sounds like he could be expelled, but even if he's behind bars, he technically could actually still. And we know he filed to run for re-election as an independent. Let's talk about the case itself and what the jury saw in that courtroom. I know that lawyers were saying they were engaged, they were applauding them for this because, again, it is summer. People have vacations and plans and work, and they set that aside. This marks the 10th week, I believe, right?
Well, we're nearly 2 months. So it started May 13th, so we've been 2 months into this. The jury was tired. They were ready to go. And, we thought that verdict was going to come in on Monday after a full day of deliberations. I think they were ready to go. And I think that indication of that early lunch to us was an indication that they were ready with a verdict, and it came very quickly.
What's some of the evidence that the jurors saw during this trial? Because, of course, defense attorneys were saying there is nothing directly linking the senator to these bribes. So what is it that jurors saw? We know prosecutors said there was a trail of hundreds of emails and text messages. So if you could explain just some of the exhibits.
So, what I want to tell you is the defense in its summation. The one thing that really stood out was there was no email, no text message, no audio. They said linking the senator to actually, extorting this money. There was no quid pro quo. But what they did see was a lot of gold bars and a lot of cash stuffed in envelopes. And I think from the questions that were being asked, Fred Davies, the defendant who was also, he was found guilty. Yes, he was found guilty on 7 of the counts, all counts. His fingerprints were on an envelope that was in the senator's jacket in the basement. Now, the senator's defense had said that all of the cash was found in his wife Nadine's locked closet that he had no key to. But the prosecution said, hey, wait a minute. Nadine Menendez's fingerprints were not on any of those envelopes. They were all Fred Davies' fingerprints, including the envelope that was in the senator's jacket in the basement. So that to me really stood out. They had questions about Fred Davies, and the fingerprints were one thing. And there were, most of those text messages were between Nadine Menendez and Wael Hanna, the other businessman who had a monopoly. Yes, born in Egypt. He had a monopoly on a halal business with the government of Egypt. The text messages mostly between the two of them. However, there were some significant text messages from the senator to Nadine, who passed those on to Wael Hanna, who passed them on to the government of Egypt. So the senator had sent some information on embassy personnel in Egypt, and much of them Egyptians. Nadine had gotten that text message, forwarded it to Wael Hanna, and then Hanna sent it to the government officials in Egypt.
And Christine, in terms of some of that cash that was found, defense attorneys, correct me if I'm wrong, they were also trying to explain it away as, well, it was born out of habit because Senator Menendez watched as his parents fled Cuba, and that's what they did. They hid cash like that.
Yeah, so the one line that the defense said was, you know, this started in Cuba. The senator's habit of hoarding cash started because his family fled Cuba before he was born. And they fled Cuba with just money they had in a grandfather clock. They said that the senator had spent all of his career saving money, withdrawing $400 to $403 a week from his savings account and just basically hoarding it away. But the prosecution said that the majority of the money that was found, the serial numbers on the cash, made them, you know, they were not from 1996 or from 2008. They were more recent serial numbers. So,
Christine, I want to stop you just for a moment because I believe we're awaiting a press conference. We're going to send it back to Jessica Moore in studio.
All right. Thanks, Alice. Yeah, we are waiting for the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York, Damian Williams. Here he is now. Let's listen in.
Moments ago, a jury in this courthouse convicted Senator Robert Menendez of corruption and national security offenses. This case has always been about shocking levels of corruption. Hundreds of thousands of dollars in bribes in the form of cash, gold bars, or Mercedes-Benz. This wasn't politics as usual, this was politics for profit. And now that a jury has convicted Bob Menendez, his years of selling his office to the highest bidder have finally come to an end. I want to thank the career prosecutors and law enforcement agents and analysts who meticulously investigated and prosecuted this case. Their work is the reason why this shocking corruption has finally been unearthed and brought to an end. They are the best of the best. I'm enormously proud of them and proud to serve with them. Thank you.
Will you seek the maximum sentence, sir?
Good afternoon. I'm Christy Curtis. I'm the Acting Assistant Director of the FBI's New York Field Office. Today is a day of victory and a victory for justice. Public corruption investigations like this hold our leaders accountable and ensure they serve the public's interest and not their own. This conviction comes after careful investigation and hard work by the FBI, IRS, and the U.S. Attorney's Office. The FBI's pursuit of truth and integrity was instrumental in securing this conviction. When an elected official betrays the trust placed in them, it undermines the foundation of our democracy. Thank you.
My name is Manuel Gomez, and I'm with IRS CI Criminal Investigations. I'm Assistant Special Agent in Charge in the New York Field Office. Thank you and good afternoon. Thank you to U.S. Attorney Damian Williams for hosting us today. It is a great commitment and collaboration between IRS Criminal Investigations, the FBI, and SDNY that today's verdict was possible. I would like to recognize the work of the FBI Public Corruption C Squad, the SDNY Public Corruption Unit, trial attorneys and paralegals for the tremendous effort in presenting this case, and the SDNY tax attorneys. I want to specifically recognize the IRS-CI special agents who worked this case in tandem with FBI special agents. Today's verdict is a reflection of all their hard work. Job well done.
Thank you, everyone.
Mr. Williams, will you seek the maximum?
And there you have it, the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York, Damian Williams, just announcing 16 federal charges for Senator Bob Menendez, found guilty by a jury of his peers on all 16 charges. Thank you to our broadcast audience for joining us for this breaking news. Stay with us on our streaming channel, CBS News New York, for continuing coverage and for the latest updates. We'll bring those to you tonight on CBS 2 News at 5 and 6. Welcome back. Jessica Moore here with Marcia Kramer, CBS 2 political reporter. Let's talk about how all this could play out in the court of public opinion. Bob Menendez now wants to run as an independent.
Yeah, that's not going to happen.
No, you don't think so?
Absolutely not.
Talk to me. Explain. You're the expert.
Here's the bottom line. He declined to run for re-election. Andy Kim is now the Democratic nominee.
Right.
He's a beloved person in New Jersey. Having been convicted of this case and dodging a bullet 6 years or 7 years ago on another case that's very similar to this case, it's unlikely that he would have the political clout to run as an independent. But also, you have to ask another question, Jessica. What effect is this also going to have on his son, Bob Menendez Jr., who's also running for re-election this year as a congressman, and whether he's going to be tainted by the same brush? You know, the other thing that you have to point out here is that Democrats sort of left the Menendez ship a while ago. It was brought home to me a few weeks, like last week, when there was a big press conference having to do with Gateway, which was something that Menendez had, you covered the story.
Right.
Menendez had championed for years and years and years.
And now it's finally happening, and he's...
And he wasn't even mentioned.
Right.
It wasn't like, thank you to Bob Menendez. And there were like 1 million people that testified, that spoke. You saw it. And everybody thanked everybody in the history of life, but Menendez's name was not mentioned until his son, Bob Menendez Jr., was mentioned as being in the audience. So it's clear that the Democrats have left him, and that, you know, they're moving right along.
Well, Senator Chuck Schumer in the last few minutes has called for him to step down. Andy Kim, as you said, Governor Murphy now also calling for him to step down. It really does seem like all New Jersey and New York leadership has sort of said, enough's enough. It's time for you to just step down. Do you think he's going to do it?
I don't know whether he's going to do it, but I think that Chuck Schumer is going to put a lot of pressure on him to step down. And I also think it's going to be interesting to see, if he does step down, who Governor Murphy appoints to fill out the unexpired term, and we have like 4 or 5 months to go.
So Menendez, we talked about, this is not the first time he's been in hot water. Obviously, even if, let's say, he says, I'm a fighter, I'm not going to, you know, kowtow to Washington politics. I'm not going to step down. I'm here for the people of New Jersey. The people of New Jersey have been watching this play out as well. I mean, that's going to affect the voters, right?
You know, it's going to affect the voters, but, you know, there are so many similarities between this case and his previous case. He was charged with taking $1 million in bribes from Solomon Melgen to try to change some Medicare policies, and also to get visas for his girlfriends. So it's the same sort of thing. I think that now he got the benefit of the doubt the first time. He's not going to get the benefit of the doubt this time from New Jersey voters who are tired of corruption and tired of corruption in their state.
You heard a reporter yell out to Damian Williams, are you going to seek the maximum sentence?
Well, you know, at this point, he's 70 years old.
Right.
So how many years can they give him? I mean, you know, there's you know, a maximum sentence could put him in jail for like 20 years. Usually it's just one charge is what happens. But the thing is this, he's been convicted. He's never going to be able to run for elected office again. He's certainly not going to be the independent candidate. And I would ask the question about whether or not whatever happened here will also affect his wife. Because remember, he tried to throw her in
under the bus, essentially.
Under the bus.
Yeah.
And the question is, do they ever try her now that he has been convicted? I mean, maybe the fact that she has breast cancer, that she's under treatment, maybe they'll just try to dismiss the case against her because they've convicted him.
They've sort of found the fall guy.
He's
This
the
is
target.
the person. This is the
he
target.
Was the target,
right?
Whatever. And I mean, I don't think he'll ever be able to run for elected office again anywhere, New Jersey or any place else.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you. I did want to ask you, because I asked Professor Sample about this, the fact that they postponed Nadine's trial indefinitely just a few hours before the verdict came down was interesting. It wasn't like they did it contingent on this verdict, but maybe now that he has been found guilty, she's sort of off the hook? I mean, is that where your political mind goes?
I mean, it may be that they just say, look, she's got breast cancer.
Right.
And, we don't know how she's doing. We don't know what the treatment is. She may have to have chemo for a long period of time, and maybe there's just compassion here.
And someone is paying for these crimes, essentially.
He's paying for it. I mean,
exactly.
I mean, it would seem that the jury has decided that they're his crimes and the crimes of the other people that he was involved with.
All right, Marcia Kramer, thank you, as always, for your expert analysis. Bob Menendez found guilty on 16 federal charges: bribery, fraud, obstruction, acting as a foreign agent. Thank you to the CBS News New York viewers for joining us for this latest update. We will continue to bring you updates on air and online. And of course, we'll have the very latest for you tonight on CBS 2 News at 5 and 6. I'm Jessica Moore along with Marcia Kramer. Have a great afternoon.
This has been breaking news.
Other news now, nearly a dozen people are hurt when a fire breaks out in Bushwood, Brooklyn, in an apartment building overnight, and authorities are looking into this as an arson case, possibly. CBS 2's Jenna DeAngelis at the scene with more. Jenna?
Chris, that's right. The NYPD and fire marshal are investigating, but as you mentioned, police say it is possible arson. It happened here on Evergreen Avenue. You can see this yellow tape behind me, damage to the building, and we've been watching investigators go in and out as neighbors wait for answers.
It's just crazy that all of this happened. Like, you go to sleep and you don't really think that this is going to happen.
Sonia Baylone was asleep in her first floor apartment when a fire broke out in her building. She woke up to smoke and first responders evacuating it.
It was really scary. I just didn't know how to react.
The FDNY says it received a call at 2:49 a.m. arriving to a fire on the first floor of the Evergreen Avenue